Welcome once again. It is Tuesday, November the 27th, a cold day in Newmarket here, snowy day. Welcome everybody to the Ask the Experts webinar. Today, our webinar is going to be about electronics, and we have a special guest with us. But as you know from every week when we do this, if you've been on, this is going to be recorded. It is being recorded right now, and it's going to be posted on the First Canada YouTube channel as soon as we finish tonight, so that you can slow it down and watch it. There's going to be a lot of detail that you might have to do that if you're new to FRC or you're new to electronics. Maybe you're on a team and this is the first time that you're going to be doing electronics as part of your team. So we will record, but along the way, if you do have questions, this is the beauty of being on it live. You can ask the questions that you have as you go along by typing them in the chat box, and we'll pause and answer some questions as we go along, or sorry, typing in the question box, and we'll get to them as we go along. If a question occurs to you after the end of the webinar, you're welcome to contact me, as I always say, at pkeenan at firstinspires.org. If you have any questions whatsoever, whether it's about this webinar or others, please don't hesitate to contact me. Next week, we're going to have a second group that's doing a robot in 3 days from the University of Waterloo, Michael Madura, and they're actually doing a really unique thing after the kickoff and after they've done their robot in 3 days, and he'll talk about that and maybe answer questions that you might have about what special things that they're doing in terms of their robot in 3 days. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get on to Brandon is that all sorts of things are opening up as we're getting closer to kickoff, and a couple of our teams now have access to 500 first choice credits. If we get time today, we'll talk a little bit about that, but if not, we'll be sending some more information out about it. But if you do have any questions, as some people have already done, please, again, don't hesitate to contact me or one of the other first senior mentors in Ontario, and we'll definitely provide you with some information as we go along. And one part of the kickoff kit of parts that's already been released is a virtual kit of parts where you can get free software to do 3D design, amongst other things. And for those lead mentors that are on tonight, that is available in your dashboard. And again, if you're not sure where to find that, please let me know and I'll show you where that is. And without further ado, I'm going to continue right now and introduce you to Brandon Jutras, who is a mentor for Team 1360. You can see he's mentored a couple of teams. They all happen to be in Oakville, because I take it he might be from out that area. But as you can see, he's an electrical engineer from the University of Waterloo. And Brandon, you tell me when to move the slides forward and you're ready to go.
All right, no problem. So yeah, just a little bit about myself. I recently graduated from electrical engineering, University of Waterloo, in the class of 2016. I started my first career way back in 2007 as a student, where I spent 4 years on 1334. Then I mentored 1334 while I was in university off and on, and today I'm mentoring Team 1360 from 2016 and onward, and it's been a fun time, and I don't intend on quitting anytime soon. Next slide. So one of the things that I want to mention is when we look at any and all FRC robots, there's going to be some extremely common components. Every single one of them is going to have a battery. Every single one of them is going to have a main breaker, PDP, Robo Reel, voltage regulator module, a radio, every motor controller, drive and auxiliary motors. And if you get into pneumatics, you'll find that a lot of them will have pneumatic control modules, as well as a compressor, solenoids, a bunch of pneumatics, plumbing, pistons, etc. So these are pretty common components, and I'm going to try to touch on everything with the exception of pneumatics today, because pneumatics is a whole other animal, and I don't think that as rookie teams you should dip into pneumatics unless you're really inclined to do so for this coming year's game. Next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about is the battery. I'm going to give recommendations as I go along with these individual components. Every battery since I've been involved, they've always been exactly the same. They've always been a 12-volt lead acid battery. In this case, they're gel. They're not actually liquid lead or liquid acid. But they always have 18 amp hour capacity. And for the most part, if First is being reasonable, they will let you use batteries from any manufacturer, or at least there's a list of approved manufacturers. Now, one of the recommendations I want to make, do not purchase any batteries until the build season starts. Although First has in the past allowed different manufacturers, they have also in the past restricted you to specific manufacturers or one manufacturer. So, you know, it used to be MK, then it was Genesis. Now it seems to be they like Interstate, but I don't want anybody to invest in batteries and then not be able to use them for the season just because, you know, it's not on the approved list. So wait until the season starts. I would recommend that all teams have 4 batteries for the season, at least. 1360, we'll buy 8 batteries for the whole season. And the other thing we'll do is we will label each and every battery with the year number that we purchased them. And that allows us to keep track on how old some of the batteries are. With them going through competition, these batteries get ruined. You know, we're pulling a lot of amps from them during the 2-minute and 15-second match. And you know, it ruins these batteries pretty quick. They're not really meant to serve that purpose, but that's the unfortunate reality of the situation that we put them in. So avoid reusing the previous season batteries for future competitions. That said, you can get away with using them for practice or anything else. Just try not to ruin your good competition batteries until your competitions actually start, until you start attending some events. The other thing I want to mention is the battery charger that comes in the kit of parts for a rookie team, not for veteran teams, is really not very good. I would recommend that you invest in a good quality battery charger, even if it's a Mastercraft one from Canadian Tire. Anything else other than the one that comes in the kit of parts, because it is slow to charge and it's a no-name Chinese brand. I just don't really trust that it's going to last a long time. Just mentioning the batteries while I'm here. Every rookie team will receive 2 batteries in their kit of parts, as they have in previous years. Veteran teams will receive 1 battery in their kit of parts, and that's all they get. Next slide. So the next component I want to talk about is the main breaker. It is very important, and inspectors will look for this, that your breaker is placed in a secure but easily accessible location on your robot in case there's an emergency. You know, it needs to be in an area that you can quickly slam your hand on that little red button to turn the power off to the robot. And I would also recommend that every student on your team knows how to operate the breaker. It is an important safety item in case something goes wrong. So you really need to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. I have seen it in the past that these breakers can fail, and I would recommend that you have a spare on hand. When they fail, they get weak, and what happens is if you exceed their the current threshold at all, they'll open up, and you won't be able to play for the rest of the match because you can't go back out in the field and turn your robot back on once it's off. So I would recommend having a spare on hand. And the last thing I would recommend is do not lose the nuts that the battery terminals connect to on the circuit breaker. They're not easy to come by because they are quarter 28 as far as I know. You know, it's not fun to lose a national fine nut that you can't easily come by. The other thing to mention is all teams, regardless of rookie or veteran, everybody gets one of these in the kit of parts. So next slide.
I'm gonna jump in at this point and say that
Sure.
you would hear many teams that have a story that they put this somewhere where it was hit by something during a match and got shut off. So be careful.
Yeah, you need to make sure that it's in a spot where another robot is not going to be able to hit it very easily, but also in an area where you can easily access it. So for on 1360, what we do is we have it mounted on our chassis facing vertical, but it's quite recessed into the chassis, so it's still very easily accessible, but it's extremely unlikely a robot will be able to hit it. Anyway, so the next component I want to talk about is the PDP, or the power distribution panel. This is the main power distribution for your whole robot. So the battery is connected at the two terminals at the bottom, where the big plus and the big minus are, and everything is powered from this module. You'll notice that there are sort of bigger connectors and smaller connectors, and the thought on those is that basically they support different current capacities. So these are called Wago terminals, or they have other names, but the Wago terminals is what they were historically called. You need, a 3mm slot screwdriver. You stick it in that upper slot. You know how you see the hole, and then there's sort of like a rectangular slot. You stick it in the upper slot, and you actually put it in flat and lift it up, and then that actually opens the spring-loaded contact in there, and then you can stick the wire in, and that's how you make the connection. This is something I would recommend that you get some practice with, because they are a little bit finicky, and it just takes a bit of getting used to. Another important note is to only install fuses on circuits that you're actually using. So if you say throughout the season you've got 8 motors in your robot, and something didn't work out the way you planned, so you've decided not to use it, but you're still leaving it powered up. Well, I mean, the best thing to do is really, if you don't plan on using whatever it is, or whatever feature, and you're worried that it could interfere with something else in your robot, I just would recommend you pull the fuse from it. That way, it's not powered. Nothing can happen with that specific circuit. So any circuits you're not using, even if you've pre-wired them maybe to expand in the future, just leave the fuses out until you really need them. It's kind of important that you place the PDP probably relatively central on your robot, but close to where you're going to put the battery, because you do have to run the big 6-gauge cable from the battery to the breaker to the PDP. And the last thing to note here is the actual battery lugs that connect to this, the actual terminals. They use a 5mm hex key. They're actually an M6 bolt, so they're one of the few metric bolts you're going to run into unless you use metric bolts to assemble things. Just something of note. Again, all teams receive one of these in the kit of parts. Next component that I want to talk about is the Robo Reel. It is, for all intents and purposes, the brain of the robot. Features 10 PWM channels, 10 digital I/O channels, 4 analog inputs, but they are voltage only, and so you cannot use them for 4 through 20 milliamp analog sensors. Keep that in mind. And they're only good up until 5 volts, so it's the other thing to keep in mind. They also have 4 relay outputs, which are actually a forward, reverse, and a ground, and they're specifically supposed to be used for a spike, which is a H-bridge relay, which is no longer sold anymore. But First has actually opened up a different relay to be used for those sold by Automation Direct. I would recommend that you check the rules out when they come out, or there's a blog post that's from First that actually discusses what is allowed this year in terms of motor controllers and things like that. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that afterwards. It has I2C, RS-232, and SPI for additional sensors. I believe in the kit of parts you get a gyroscope, which is a SPI sensor, and it is just a little board that plugs into the SPI port. And then there's this MXP port, which is that one in the very middle of the Robo Reel, which is used for additional I/O. So there's additional PWM channels and digital I/O, as well as some other things that you can plug into there. In most circumstances, I don't think you'll be needing that unless you choose to go with an advanced sensor board that is compatible with that port. Some of my recommendations for this, I've seen over a few years, so many different teams drill on top of their Robo Reel, and that gets metal shavings inside there, and then it either breaks or even worse, it starts doing weird intermittent problems. And they are awful to try to debug when you're in the middle of a competition, and somebody who doesn't understand what's going on drilled some aluminum on top of this and left the shavings inside, or got them inside, and it really sucks. So I recommend that you cover it up when you're drilling, just even with a rag or whatever, just to not get the shavings in there, and to tape over any unused connections. So all those, if you're not using any DIOs or any of the analog ins or any of those things, just put some electrical tape right over top of them. That way, it prevents any aluminum getting in there and doing some damage. And again, all teams receive one of these in the kit of parts. So one of the final major components I'm going to talk about, other than a couple others, but is the voltage regulator module, or VRM for short. I've said that this is specifically used to power the radio and additional auxiliary electronics. So what I mean by that is the radio or Wi-Fi bridge, which I'm going to cover in a moment, is powered solely off this voltage regulator module, off the 12-volt 2-amp connection. Auxiliary electronics, what I mean by that is, if, let's say, you have some LEDs that you want to light up on your robot or something like that, or you need to provide power to them, that's what those additional connections are for. Two things of note here. These modules, these VRM modules, are really cheaply made by Across the Road Electronics, and they are easy to break. If you exceed the current ratings, they do break. So it is important that whatever you connect to these things, that's not the radio, that they do not exceed the current ratings. You'll break this and you'll be so sad because you're out now $70. So I just really recommend that you be careful with this thing. And you have to use it to power the radio. It is per the rules, so you have no choice. The other thing of note here is the connections that you make that you connect to the radio are called Weed-Muller connectors. They are spring-loaded connectors that have that little button on top. You have to use a little screwdriver to press it down and push the wire in. Do not use excessive force on these. You will break them. You'll get the button stuck inside the unit. It's not good. So just be careful when you're using these, and hopefully you'll be all good. Again, all teams receive one of these in the kit of parts. So this leads us nicely into the radio. So I call it a radio. It's a little bit of a historical name. In FRC, we actually used to use real shortwave radios that had a transmitter and receiver. But nowadays we don't use those anymore. We use Wi-Fi bridges. This is the model number of the specific Wi-Fi bridge that you're allowed to use. I am not 100% sure, but it seems like they are dropping support for the legacy D-Link ones, which were sold a couple years ago. I don't know when they're going to drop support for the other one. As far as I know today, this is the only radio that you can go out and buy for your robot that is 100% FRC legal. We may see in the rules that this could change. They might add a different model, but as of today, all we know is that this one is 100% legal, and you can go out and buy it today. They're not cheap. They're like $130 or something along those lines. So avoid breaking them. Like I said earlier, the radio has to be connected to that 12-volt, 2-amp power connection on the VRM. That's what the rules state. I assume the rules are not going to change again this year regarding that. And the other thing that is important that first made legal a couple years ago is the use of a passive PoE ejector. These open mesh radios, they support passive PoE, which is different from 802.3 AF and AT PoE. They're actually two different standards. The passive PoE injector is the product that you can, it's just a simple product that you can go out and buy from Rev Robotics. I've even left the link in this slide for you. I would highly recommend you use the power over Ethernet injector because the barrel jacks get loose over time and they can give you intermittent power connections. And the last thing you want in the middle of a match is for your radio to be disconnected and you're dead on the field. I know what that feels like because 2 years ago, that's exactly what 1360 struggled with, and I would hate to see any other team struggle with that same issue. So I would really recommend that. That's probably if you're going to take anything away from this, buy a passive PoE injector, please. And as far as the radio goes, all teams receive one radio in the kit of parts. Last year, they did receive a PoE injector. I do not know if Rev Robotics will be as generous this year. We can only wait and see. Like I said earlier, these are the approved motor controllers that you can go out today and purchase for the 2019 season. You can note that there are 2 ones that are new for the 2019 season that were not available previously. The rest of the ones in the list are all ones that were either new last year or have been on the market for a little small amount of time.
Brandon,
I am not even going to. Yep, go ahead.
Can you just explain to everybody what's the purpose of a motor controller? Well, the name kind of gives it away. But.
Sure. Yeah. So a motor controller's operation is meant to control the speed of a motor, and the way it does that is using a technique called pulse width modulation. If you don't know what that is, it essentially is a square wave where the duty cycle is varied in order to give it. Basically, they're 12-volt pulses, and the duty cycle is varied in order to give it the illusion that you're controlling it at different voltages. I would highly recommend that you take a quick look at the Wikipedia page if you're interested in how that all works, but I'm not going to, that's kind of beyond the scope of this. But in essence, all these motor controllers, every single one of them, all they do is control the speed of a DC motor. In the case of the Spark Max, that it actually also controls the speed of a brushless motor, which are different from brushed DC motors. I'll cover a little bit about brushless motors in a future slide. The Spark Max and the DMC60C are new for 2019. The Spark Max you can easily get in Canada from Studica after it is released. It is currently on pre-order from Rev Robotics, and it is not going to be easily obtainable for a little while. DMC60C, I believe you can only buy from Vigilant directly, and it's in the United States. I'm not sure if you really want to go down that road, but I did list it for completeness. The Rev Robotics Spark is the most likely controller that you're going to be receiving in the kit of parts. The past 2 years, the Sparks have been included, 4 for a rookie team and 2 for a veteran team. I'm going to cover that a little bit afterwards. Victor SPX is new as of last year, just a pretty basic motor controller. The Talon SRX is an advanced motor controller. I'll cover that on a future slide. And the other 2 last ones here are actually ones I didn't even know were available until I started putting these slides together. So I actually don't know much about these mindsensors.com motor controllers, but they are legal for use. If you can get your hands on them, go right ahead, and maybe that's the better solution for you. Today I'm going to cover the Spark Max, the Spark, and the Talon SRX, just for completeness here.
Brandon, I have a question from Kim. She wants to know
Okay.
why did First add 2 new motor controllers this year? I mean, I work for First and I have no idea why they did, but
Yeah, it's hard to say. So the Digilant one, the company discontinued the DMC 60 and replaced it with the 60C. So I'm guessing it's just an update. So they just decided to support the new model. As far as the Spark Max goes, I'm not sure exactly how that decision was made, but it is everything that is going to be legal for the year was actually posted as a blog post directly from First on the 14th of November. So this is all very new information to everybody, not just yourself or myself. And they outlined that that the Spark Max motor controller is a allowed motor controller for the 2019 rule set. How they make that decision, I'm actually not really aware on who decides what is legal and what is not. Because there's plenty of motor controllers in the market, but somebody determines that these are the ones that you're allowed to use. There's actually a whole bunch of other ones that you're also allowed to use. I would recommend that you take a look at the full list on the FRC blog. If you when you get these slides, you can click that source button. It'll take you straight to that blog post. The reason why I didn't list everything on here is because the other ones that are not listed are not available for purchase anymore. They are all discontinued motor controllers. So I figured it wasn't worth listing unless you could actually go out and buy them today. So that was kind of where I'm coming from with that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned before, in the 2018 kit of parts, all rookie teams received 4 Rev Robotics Spark motor controllers. And the other thing they received is 2 CTRE Talon SRX motor controllers. And veteran teams only received 2 Rev Robotics Sparks as part of the kit of parts. In the 2019 kit of parts, I know about as much as you do, which is absolutely nothing. And we have no idea what will be included. I think it'll be very likely that we will see Sparks again. Perhaps we will see a Spark Max included if Rev Robotics is feeling generous. I don't know if we'll see the Talons again in the rookie kit. It's hard to say. We just when kickoff rolls around, the checklists come out and everybody sees what's in the kits. So unfortunately, I don't have any more information other than that for you. So I'm going to go under the assumption that you'll be getting the Rev Robotics Spark and the Talon SRXs again and give you some information on them. So the Rev Robotics Spark is just a very simple PWM controlled motor controller. PWM is the pulse width modulation technique, which I mentioned earlier. You connect this PWM cable directly to the Robo Reel on one of the PWM channels. And I want to make a few recommendations. You need to really pay attention to the markings for V plus and M plus. V plus means the input power from the PDP, or the power distribution panel, and the M plus is the positive motor connection. So it is labeled power and motor, so it should be pretty hard to make a mistake on this, but I just want to point it out just because. The other thing that's of note here is you'll notice that these are screw terminals. So you need to use the automotive style terminals that there is a baggie of them that will come in the kit of parts. They have in the past couple years. They will likely come in the kit of parts again. You'll need to use the yellow ones, which are rated for 12 gauge or to 10 gauge wire, and they should be sized specifically for a number 6 Imperial or an M3 screw. Those are M3 screws on there, but a number 6 is roughly equivalent. So if you go out to Canadian Tire and you need some additional terminals, that's what you should be looking for. You'll find them. Another thing that's worth saying, if you're going to be using these kinds of terminals or these motor controllers, invest in a decent crimping tool. The $10 cheapo kit from Canadian Tire, although it has a crimping tool, it is not a good one. please just spend the $30 on this channel lock one or something similar, and just get something half decent. You'll thank me later. When your wires stop falling out of the terminals and everything else, they'll be much happier that you spent the $30 instead of the $10. So that's those are my recommendations regarding these. These are dead simple motor controllers. I would highly recommend you make use of these for your drivetrain. Unless you feel the need that you want to do some advanced techniques, but I wouldn't say that you should do that for your first season. If you're a veteran team, maybe you skip over these and you go to some Talons or a more advanced motor controller just to be able to get some better functionality. So the next component, next motor controller I want to talk about is the Talon SRX. This is an advanced motor controller. It's been on the market for a few years at least, maybe even 4. It is an advanced motor controller with sensor input, meaning that you can attach encoders and limit switches and an analog sensor to that little connection that's on the top of the motor controller, and you can interact or use those sensors while you're trying to control this motor controller. So it has a built-in programmable PID controller. What that is a PID controller is a control system in which you have to work hard at, and it takes, even veteran teams struggle with these. You have to sit there and tune them such that when you tell it, I want 50% power or specific speed, that your encoder comes back and says, oh, you're at this number, you're at this number. So what happens is it essentially gives you closed loop control. And what that means exactly is the amount of speed or distance that you're requesting is the amount of distance that it'll travel. A PID controller is an advanced concept which you only really learn about properly in 3rd year of university. So you're not I'm not gonna expect that anybody will understand the math fully or anything like that, but there are white papers and other things about PID on Chief Delphi and other resources that hopefully can explain it in a more simplistic manner. Regardless, it is that system or that controller is built into the motor controller, which is very convenient, which is why you'll see many advanced teams or many veteran teams and the top teams in the competition, they'll be using these motor controllers. So there is merit to them for sure. Most people don't know this, but not only can you control these motor controllers over the CAN bus, but you actually can use them as PWM motor controllers. So if you do get these in the kit of parts and you need a couple extra motor controllers just for something simple, just use these. Don't go out and waste any money on additional motor controllers. Use these up, plug them into the Robo Reel. They will work. Most people don't know that, and they assume that they have to use CAN. You do not have to use CAN with these. You have to use CAN if you are using sensor input, but that is the only case in which you are forced to use the CAN bus for these motor controllers. Most people don't know that. I'm just making mention of it. Keep in mind, these things are expensive. I think one of these motor controllers runs like $120. They're not cheap. Don't go out and buy these if you're not planning on using the sensor input. If you get them for free in the kit of parts, good deal. Or if you get them for free as, well, free in quotes, as part of first choice, good deal. But don't pay outright for these unless you are planning on using the features that they offer. I just want to make mention of that using these, if you're not using the sensor input, you're not gonna be making good use of your budget. Another thing of note here is that you really should be using some decent quality connectors for these motor controllers, or actually realistically for all of them. The Spark, you kind of are forced to using ring terminals, but with these, you really should use, I would recommend power pull connectors, which I believe you get some in the kit of parts, maybe just a handful. That's what we use on 1360, but other teams make use of these XT60 connectors, which are solder on connector. It does mean that whoever's doing this needs to know how to solder, whereas with the power pole connector, you just need a tool. You know, and if you don't have either of those options really available to you, you can still use the automotive style quick disconnect connectors. When I was a student on 1334, that's all we had. That's all we used. Everything works just fine with those as well. So if you want to go that route, that's fine too. I'm just making recommendation of some nicer quick disconnect connectors. The other thing that I should mention here is you do not have to be tied to cross-the-road electronics sensors. You can choose to use any sensor that you please on these motor controllers, but that said, it has to go on that little port that's on top of the motor controller. From Studica, you can buy a breakout board that allows you to wire any encoder, any limit switch, any analog sensor directly to these, and all you need is either a soldering iron or header pins. Pretty easy. I would recommend that if it works better for you if you are choosing to use sensor input. And lastly, the thing I want to mention is if you do choose to go with the power pole connectors, invest in a tri-crimp tool. They're $40 US from PowerWorks or 43 something from AndyMark, or you can buy them directly from Studica. Studica, they're already in Canada. I think they're $60 Canadian, give or take. It's not bad. It's a pretty reasonably priced tool, and it's going to make a good crimp every time. So the next component I want to talk about is the brand new Rev Robotics Spark Max. The information on this motor controller is a little bit sparse because it's a pre-order. You know, the information only came out a couple weeks ago. It's not, you know, there isn't a ton out there. There's no user manual yet. So take everything I'm going to say with a little bit of grain of salt. And I would not recommend that you run out and buy these right away, but I'm going to cover it just for completeness. The Spark Max is the only FRC legal motor controller that is capable of controlling both brushed and brushless motors. That is a 100% fact. For the 2019 season, this is your only option if you choose to go with a brushless motor that is on the approved list. And the only brushless motor is on the approved list is another Rev Robotics product called the Neo brushless motor, which I'm going to cover on a separate slide, so we'll get to it. This motor controller is USB-C programmable. You can dump in all the configuration that you possibly could want directly into the motor controller, making these a little bit more versatile than the Talon SRX. This means that you do not need to control this over the CAN bus. You can program exactly what settings you need directly onto the controller itself, and you do not need to use the CAN bus. You can use good old-fashioned PWM control. You know, I know it's old-fashioned. I know everybody likes the CAN bus, but but there's no sense in knocking a tried and true connection for PWM. It always works, and this controller really gives you the option to do kind of however you want to do it. Again, it has another built-in programmable PID controller, and in this case, it works as well with this brushless motor. I do not know if it will be included in the 2019 kit of parts. Perhaps it'll be included as a promotional item if Rev Robotics is nice, but we don't know yet. My recommendations are, I think you should wait until the bugs are worked out in this product. It is a new product. You know, we don't know what kind of issues it's going to have. We don't know what the longevity is like. I look at it and I don't see any easy way of mounting it without using zip ties. So there are some issues with this that I would see that would keep me away from it right away. And again, these are quite expensive. So if you don't plan on using the features, don't get them. Save your money and use it elsewhere. That's one thing I really want to stress. So now we should get on the topic of motors. This is a relatively complete list of motors that are available for the 2019 season. Not all of these are useful. I'm not going to lie to you. Most of them are actually not very useful at all. The most important ones are the two top ones that are new for 2019. Andy Mark Redline A, which is basically the same thing as a Redline, but I'll cover that in a future slide. And the Rev Robotics Neo Brushless, which again I'm going to cover in another slide. There's also the tried and true sim motor 775 Pro, which is very similar to a Redline. The Andy Mark 9015, which is just a random like motor. There's the Vex bag motor, which is the sim motor is the black one on the left, and the bag motor is the little black one on the right. It's actually quite a bit smaller. There's the mini sim, which I'm not showing here. The PG, which means planetary gearbox, is actually the one on the very right in the middle. Snowblower motor is the funky looking one that's kind of sideways in the middle there. The Never Refs, I've actually never even come across, so I've actually never used them before. The Redline, which again, I've already said is the same thing as a 775 Pro. Nidec Dynamo brushless DC motor, which came out last year. It's not very good. It's not very strong. Not a lot of people are using them. I wouldn't go all out and get one of those things. And then the last thing that's worth mentioning is the automotive motors, which always come in the kit of parts. They are not very good, and you will struggle to find usable ways to make use of them. I would recommend that you get a different motor that's better suited for the application instead of making use of those. They're very difficult to work with. Mounting them is very difficult. Sometimes the electrical connection is very annoying, those kinds of things. So last year, this is what was received as part of the kit of parts. All teams received a Redline motor, 4 throttle motors, and 2 window motors. Those are the automotive motors that I'm asking you to stay away from. And I don't recall, Paul, but I checked the checklist and it said they only got 2 sim motors. I thought there was 4, but I checked the checklist. It said 2.
Yeah, I
so
don't
not
remember
sure if
seeing more than that.
Yeah.
The team I was with was the Afghan girls, and I don't remember them having a lot, but they got a lot of support from other teams, so they might have gotten a few from you guys or from 1241 or from 771 who they worked with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So last year, rookie teams got 2 sim motors. On top of that, those are the motors that are the tried and true motors. They've been used in drivetrains, shooters, you name it, for climbers. You name it for years. They've been in FRC since I started, and they were there before then. So they've been around for a while. So you can't really knock something that's been in use for 15 years. So now to cover a few motors here. So I said that there's this Redline A. Again, not much information on this one. As far as I can tell, it is just the same thing as the Redline, but it has a 10% higher free speed. So I guess they've either made some kind of efficiency improvement or some kind of improvement. I wouldn't hold my breath on this being significantly better than a Redline or a 775 Pro. Again, as I mentioned, the Redline and the 775 Pro are actually the same motor, just rebranded. These are powerful motors if you gear them correctly. So Redline A, Redline, or 775 Pro, they are all really good motors if they are geared in a good way. They are really good for a shooter application or something that's high speed. You can get lots of torque out of them if you do gear them down, but I would recommend that you do not put these in a situation where they will be under stall conditions. The amount of motors of 775s that I have seen teams let the magic smoke out is insane. You do not want to use these under stall conditions. You will burn them out and it will smell. And you just really don't want to go down that road if you can avoid it. Again, to make connections to these, you do need a soldering iron. You need a decent high wattage soldering iron. You know, the cheapy $20 soldering iron that you found on sale at Canadian Tire is not going to work for putting connections on these motor tabs. They take a lot of heat, and you do really need a good soldering iron. I would recommend a decent, like Weller or something along those lines that is going to put stable connections on these. You just really need them. There's also electrical putty is what it's called. It's just moldable putty that you can put over top of the electrical connections just to prevent any shorts. Some inspectors are a little bit more lenient than others on open air electrical connections that are uncovered. So to avoid any issues with your robot inspector, I just recommend you get some electrical putty or cover them up with tape, even just anything just so that they're not exposed. You should consider using they have inline power connectors. I've listed 2 part numbers. They're from 2 different manufacturers. They're both, I think one's from Australia and one's in the United States. They call them inline power connectors. They actually go on top of the motor tabs, and they just make connecting to them a lot easier. Again, you still need a soldering iron to use these. And the other thing worth noting here is the screws that mount them are, I believe they are M4. You need to make sure that you have the tooling and the fasteners to mount these, because you know I'd hate for a team to want to use these and then not actually have the screws that they need to mount them to something. So just keep that in mind. You know, you're probably going to need a metric Allen key set and hide it away somewhere, or a metric socket set if you choose to use hex head cap screws. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, Brandon, I think we're going to have to end it for tonight because I know someone's coming on after us and they're going to need the channel. But
all right,
it's been very informative, and I'll definitely send this out for everybody so that they can take a closer look at some of the great tips that are there and share it with their teams. The other thing I was thinking, maybe Brandon, one day we can have you back on and do some demo video of how to do some of the connections and how to maybe wire a motor to a motor controller to the PWM to the power distribution panel, which might be a great resource for teams. So
sounds good.
That would be great.
I'd be happy to do that.
We'll have to work on that one together. I just want to thank Brandon again for coming on. And again, as always, these are recorded and they'll be up on the First Canada YouTube channel. And I will post the link on the Facebook, First Canada Facebook page. And I'll be sending out an email about that to the people that have registered for this one and in the past. So once again, Brandon, thank you very much. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll see you around, but good luck on your season coming up.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Good night, everybody.